Hey everyone, welcome to the Fuel the Fight podcast. I'm your host, Lieutenant Colonel Nick Barringer, and again, another wonderful episode because we have Colonel Chad Koenig, the commander of RARE, here on the podcast today, a fellow dietitian and 65 Charlie. Sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm glad you're happy to be. I mean, fresh off his flight. So literally from an airplane to our couch, through the uniform on. So we really appreciate that. You know, one of the things, sir, anytime somebody comes on in uniform, I like to ask is, you know, what brought you into the Army? Why do you serve?
So what brought me in and why I serve are probably two distinctly different questions, right? You know, and so I think we see this a lot. You know, what brings us in sometimes aren't the altruistic motives.
Yeah,
you know,
that's fair.
Yeah. You know, in my case, I was going to a small private school. I was going into year 3, and money was getting a little short. And there was a public university right down the road that had a very active ROTC program, and my school was liberal arts and nursing. And at the time, the Army was recruiting nurses extremely heavily, so a lot of my friends were in ROTC. So, you know, again, explored it as an option, and it started off a little bit, sounded like something that I was interested in for many reasons, you know, everywhere from the mission to the opportunities. But in the end, a lot of it came down to some of the financial stuff also that tipped it. And I was truly one of those individuals that my entire plan was to serve 4 years and get out. So there was a commitment that came along with of course taking the scholarship, and you know, I figured it was great job experience, right? Because we all struggled to get our first job out of college, and so you know they'll send me to a medical facility somewhere. I will get 3-4 years of experience, and then I can enter the market with that experience. And actually, if you go back even farther, I did a scholarship qualification camp, and there were some things that happened that kept me from getting offered the reserve option. But there's a really good chance I would have taken it. Again, nothing untoward. It was merely I ended up with a fever. Ended up you know, out of training for a couple days, which was a point system, and so I didn't get offered the reserve scholarship. They offered me the active duty one instead. And so, but if I would have been offered the reserve scholarship, I might have taken it. So sometimes it's happy coincidences that get you to where you're at. And hopefully you add in a little bit of hard work and perseverance.
Oh yeah. A fever, yeah, the difference, a couple degrees, you know, there.
The one and only time my entire life I was hospitalized.
Wow. And so that's the active duty.
That's what started the path.
That's what started the path. Well, so now, yeah, it begs the question is what kept you in? Because now 20, how many?
Just about 27.
27 years. So you went from 4 years in and out, you know, original plan, to 27 years. You overshot that goal significantly by 23 years. So what kept you in? What keeps you in? What keeps you serving?
It's a combination. It's the people. It's the opportunity to serve. It's the mission. It's, you know, it all. And to be frank, it's just the opportunities, right? And so I enjoy, and I'm proud of the fact that I'm a nutritionist. But what the Army's allowed me to do is expand in leadership roles that, frankly, I would have never been able to do if I wasn't in the military. On top of that, they keep offering me challenging jobs and assignments that, you know, this current one literally allows me to travel the world and you know, better understand, you know, the entire geopolitical, you know, spectrum. And that's not something that a lot of us get to do, right? Whether you're in the Army, even when you're in the Army, a lot of us don't get to do that, much less if you're not in the Army. And so it's just you know, it took me about 14 years before I was in a position where I was willing to admit I was going to make a career of it, right? It was just every time a new assignment came up, let me see what they offer me, and if it's something that has the right balance between challenging as well as, you know, opportunities, you know, I'll consider it and I'll take it, and it was just one after another. And once I hit around 14 years, I'm like, okay, it's probably time to.
I'm in too deep.
This is a career. And then even after I hit 20, it was just one opportunity after another that they keep offering me up until this point. So
No, and I'm glad you touched on that as kind of your unique opportunities, because as a dietitian, typically, we're doing something in the nutrition realm, whether that's over a nutrition care division, whether like in my position at the schoolhouse where we're training future dietitians. But you went off and you commanded a hospital, and now you're at Rare. Can you tell us a little bit for the people who maybe not know about the mission and what that's all about?
So, Rare is DoD's largest biomedical research facility. I think it's 129 years now. So
Wow.
it's been up and going. So if it involves infectious diseases or brain health, all the way from resiliency to traumatic brain injury, we look at it, we study it, and we try to find ways to reduce the impact on soldiers. And so in infectious disease, that might be a whole series of countermeasures, all the way from vaccines to therapeutics. And in brain health, it's everywhere from understanding, how it happens, what type of overpressure will cause what type of injury, all the way to the other end, which is, okay, we know, how do we measure that it happened? How do you develop things like biomarkers so we can actually definitively diagnose, and on down that line. And so it's kind of the entire spectrum. We also have a large overseas footprint that, depending upon which lab it's at, they will do some of the same work, especially in the infectious disease area, but they take on, they have a heavy role in surveillance, worldwide surveillance also, as well as looking for, things like resistant organisms and stuff like that might be emerging in different environments. And so, we have one platform that operates out of Southeast Asia, another platform that operates out of Eastern Europe, another platform that operates out of Africa right now. And so combination, that along with some of the other DoD partners kind of gives us a little bit of a net that we can cast over a lot of the potential areas of operation that we have out there. So yeah, it's an exciting place and an amazing mission.
Yeah, and you talked about those kind of like those satellite labs. Can you talk a little bit about your experience like traveling out to those? Because I've seen some of the cool pictures, and so that was one of the things I want to talk about, because I don't think other Army labs have that wide net, as you say, like Rare does.
Yeah, not in the medical realm, at least. I mean, obviously, the U.S. and DoD has a series of overseas labs, but from the medical standpoint. So we're part of MRDC, which recently transitioned from Futures Command, or is in the process of transitioning from Futures Command over to DHA. But from a medical standpoint, Rare is the one that oversees those footprints. And so what we have is we have three main forward directorates. Tbilisi, Georgia is one of them. They're working on standing up a sub-lab in Bulgaria. Southeast Asia, we've had a partnership with the Royal Thai Army for 60 plus years now.
Wow.
Several months ago, we celebrated the 60th anniversary. And then they have other field sites in countries in that area. We have one in Nepal, one in Cambodia, in the Philippines. And then in the African footprint, we are based out of Kenya. Two main locations in Kenya, and then we also have sites in Uganda, Tanzania, and then Nigeria. So speaking of the African lab, that's probably one of the submissions that I didn't mention earlier. And so majority of what we do is infectious disease research, but we also have a public health arm. So there's a program called PEPFAR, which is a President's Emergency Relief Program for combating HIV. And so we have parts of the portfolio, along with other organizations like CDC, USAID, things like that. We have parts of the portfolio in several African countries, and then also in the Philippines, where we work to combat HIV and the AIDS epidemic. But what it also does is it allows us to build credibility and partnerships within those countries, which also allows us better access to samples and things of that, which enables our surveillance mission. And so it's a mission that feeds on itself in a way. And so it's all those agreements and partnerships that allow us to, better, be a sentinel, for U.S. soldiers. So.
No, that's great. And you touched on it because that was one of kind of my questions is, you have the lab and then the science, but then being in those locations, the relationship that goes on and building it to maintain with that partner nation and what goes into that.
But I think that's one of the key parts, right? So, these forward directorates, technically work for DoD, MRDC, myself, but we fall under chief of mission, right? And so it's the embassy, and they're interested in global health engagement, and so we feed into that mission, and frankly, we're there at the whim of the whim's probably the wrong words, but
Right.
we're there with the ambassador's blessing, and so
Right.
what we do is we kind of have to do a little bit of both. We have a DoD Army medical mission, but we have to balance that with what the U.S.'s mission is within that country, as far as establishing relationships and also making sure that we're doing no harm at the same time.
No, that was one of my big things is like, yeah, it's just, so complicated. And I've kind of followed your pictures, in your travels and thinking about that and those different situations and kind of all the things that those labs have to balance. What, besides that are some of the biggest like ahas maybe you've had since taking over Rare and learning about, the mission?
I think they're manifold. We all, and anyone who's studied history, knows, or at least has heard about the impact of disease non-battle injuries and basically, just the disease aspect and its influence on any engagement, whether that be a kinetic one or a non-kinetic one. But, as you get more into the mission, you learn and you understand and you get a little more of the history and the impacts, then you real quickly understand, why what we do is so important and why it's so complex. It's not as simple as, okay, we'll apply this amount of brain power and funds to this problem and find a solution within the next, a lot of times that solution has to be multifaceted. It might be a vaccine, it might be therapeutics. Unfortunately, with some of the, more prevalent threats that are out there, things like malaria and stuff like that, they're ever evolving. And
Yeah.
so, it's not a matter of finding one therapeutic that works, because that therapeutic will become less and less, effective. And then it's, also the combination. Okay, you have a therapeutic, but what's the logistical footprint, or, the logistical trail that has to, so maybe a vaccine's better, but vaccines, despite what we saw in the last couple of years with COVID, for the most part, vaccines do not get developed within 2 years.
Right.
This was a perfect storm, to be honest.
Yeah.
Anyone that believes, the COVID-19 vaccines were developed in 2 years probably is a little bit uninformed. There was work going on in the background that led us to those vaccines for 10, 20 more years, and then luckily we as a nation, proved what we can accomplish if we are willing to put a lot of brain power towards it, and frankly, a lot of finances and funds towards it. And we de-risked the research process, because normally it's a very, very stepwise process. You may do some basic science, and that progresses all the way to doing, animal models, and then if that proves successful, then you may go to phase 1 studies and and human trials and things along that line, and then phase 2 and
Yeah.
phase 3. But you're always waiting to show the success as it goes along. Whereas with these vaccines, what we were able to do is continue to move forward and find out, okay, it is successful, but guess what? We already have the next phase lined up, and so it's not that they shortcutted any of the work. What they did is just made sure that there wasn't the normal pauses, and they kept moving forward, and sometimes they could move forward in parallel. Whereas if it was just an industry product, you have to de-risk it.
Right.
The cost benefit wouldn't have been there traditionally. And, and also, frankly, COVID was a lot easier to counter than some of the other threats that are out there. I won't say it was easy,
Right.
but it's definitely not one of the most complicated ones that are out there. So again, there's things like HIV and malaria that we've been trying to develop vaccines for 30, 40 years. And you have some of the brightest minds from not just the military, but, across society as a whole. And they continue to work on it. So.
Yeah, I mean that is the great example is malaria, because I think of taking my doxy in Afghanistan every morning, for thinking about the malaria threat.
Well, and then there's the question, right? Did you take it every morning?
I did.
Did you take it before you left and after you came back?
Yeah, right.
You did great.
Yeah.
You were a good steward. Some of these overseas trips that I go on, obviously because of the areas we go into. I have to take some of the anti-malarials also, and it takes work to remember.
Right.
To do it.
No, it does.
And
Yeah.
It takes being very intentional, and while I would love to believe that each and every soldier will do that,
Yes.
I think we probably know that that's
Oh, no.
realistic, right?
Right. No.
It's definitely better than nothing. So.
No, we have something for there. Coming as particularly as a dietitian, going into command. Is there anything you wish you knew before going into command, or are there any things that maybe for that young, let's say, captain, lieutenant out there that, going to read your profile when I post this and be like, hey, I want to be like Colonel Koenig, what they can be doing to better prepare themselves to go down this road?
Yeah, command overall, especially as you continue to progress, it's more about leadership, right? It's real easy. I would be being dishonest if I said that when I got matched to rare, I'm like, well, that's perfect. I'm an expert in infectious diseases and brain health, right?
Yeah.
But what you really end up realizing is it's about managing personalities, and it's about leadership. I have an entire organization full of brilliant scientists. They don't need me to be a brilliant scientist. My job is to advocate for them, is to enable them, is to provide a bit of strategic direction, interpret the priorities from DoD, Army, and as they go on down the line, and then apply them in house and allow the scientists to do exactly what they like to do, which is science. And so I think a lot of it comes down to is, it starts off with you have to understand that that's what the job is when you get into it. It's a lot about managing personalities. It's a lot about leading. It's not necessarily about applying expertise. And what a lot of leaders have tendency to do, to include myself, in the past is it's that whole concept of mission command, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to give the direction, and provide the guidance that allows your subordinates to march out in the direction that you help mold and apply. If you're down in the weeds trying to micromanage decisions, not only are you going to lose your followers, but you're going to fail because you can't be, especially the larger the organization that you're in, you can't be involved in all those style of decisions. There's just not enough time in the day, nor frankly is it your job.
People focus on success, but usually, like a lot of success, there was a lot of failures along the way. So if you don't mind sharing, kind of, is there a failure in your career that you really learned something from? There was like something that, that just stuck with you, that maybe you did wrong or something happened wrong out of your control, and you're like, I will never make that mistake again, or this kind of guided you forward?
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling to come up with a large one but there's plenty of small. There's plenty of smaller ones.
If there's a theme or anything to say, yeah.
And I think there's definitely a couple different themes. One is it was a general theme. It was understanding what you don't know, right? And you would think that you get more confident as you progress in your career, and in some ways you do, but for me, what I did, or what I like to believe I did, is I got a better understanding of what my limitations are, and so a combination of, a combination of better understanding what my strengths and weaknesses are have helped me become a better leader as we went along. There's plenty of examples that I'll give, and times that I'll give that I probably won't go to in this podcast of situations where I was in, where afterwards, I look back and I'm going, okay, that wasn't the most mature decision to make, right? And I think back even before I joined the Army, there's a whole series of choices that we make when we're young, whether it be when you're in college or right after, and you're just like, you know what, if that went a little bit different, I might not be where I am today.
Yeah.
And so what that does for me, and what that's done for me, is made me look really carefully every time a soldier makes a misstep, and think through it and say, okay, is this really something that they can't recover from? If the answer to that is yes, and occasionally it is, right? Okay. But most times the answer to that isn't yes. And then being really careful as far as how you handle it, and do you handle it in a way that allows a person to recover personally and professionally. So one of the, a lot of my mistakes when I was younger, if there was a theme, I was extremely black and white. There's no, and what I mean by that is there's no gray area.
Right.
It is this is right, this is wrong, and there is no in between. And I've rarely come across a circumstance that there isn't a in between, right? Sometimes it's interpretation. Sometimes it's a understanding of the different sides and aspects. So.
Are there any tools? Because you mentioned something I like is the self-awareness, and that's obviously critical, right? As a leader, as a human, as an officer, are there any tools you've picked up over the years that helps with that? Or I know there's different like assessments. We've all done like the Myers-Briggs or something, but I didn't know if there's anything you've come across.
Yeah, I mean, nothing that stands out to me. I've done most of those, and and obviously those help to a point. Sometimes it's, I struggle with this a little bit because I don't think the answer is the same for everyone, but sometimes I think it's, you have to fail.
Right.
You have to have something not so good happen to you, right? And then step back and be willing to reassess. And there's tools that can help prepare you for that, but some of that is just building resiliency in people, and so that, because we're all going to fail, right? And so when you fail, does that, do you learn from that and do you grow, or do you sit back and that gets you to analyze, and so I've had, like we all have, there's failures in your military career, and then, obviously also within your personal life, relationships that don't work out and things along that line, and sometimes they can be utterly crushing, and so it's can you step back and you look at it and can you learn from it and can you grow? And so I don't think I answered your question about tools per se. For me, it was more of a process than any given tool. And I'll be honest with you, I really worry about it. I don't know if it's a generational thing, or if we are just putting stressors on our population now that we didn't before, whether it's because of that 24/7, always under the microscope, it almost leads to a zero defect, because if you do anything, it's prime time. If you make a mistake, it's out there for everyone to see. And so because of that, I think as a population, we're struggling with the impact, and whether it be we're a little less resilient, or whether that be we're just as resilient, but we are putting people through things that we never did before. I mean, most of us had times in our life where we were bullied let's face it, sometimes kids are not kind, right?
Right. Yeah.
Back when I was young, we went home and then I was lucky enough to have that cocoon, that loving home environment, and I'd get you might get exposed to some of those negative influences a couple hours a day, but now it's 24 hours a day.
Right.
People have Facebook sites and Twitter and Snapchat and whatever the TikTok or whatever the platform or choice is, and it just allows people to provide feedback that isn't always positive on a 24-hour basis. And I can't imagine going through that as I was growing up.
No, and I never even thought about that as like, at least growing up, similar the bullying stopped when you went home, whereas now it can kind of continue on. But I do love the fact that you said, sir, hey, it's okay to fail, because I do see that, even with like young dietitians going through the program or want to be future dietitians, very type A personality, and if they get a bad grade in a class, it's like the end of the world, and it's like, no, it's you learn and you move on. So
no, I can think of several scenarios where just because of the way things lined out that I'm like, okay, so I see where my career path is going, and it's going to probably plateau about here, because of a series of reasons, and then it's a matter of just persistence, I guess. You do the best you can day in and day out, and in my case, things happen to work out for me, and then I was given other opportunities, and those opportunities led to other opportunities, which led to other opportunities. But at the same time, it's some of it's persistence, some of it is hopefully a little bit of talent, but a lot of it also just happens to do with I don't want to say being in the right place at the right time, because I think we create our own opportunities to a point, but you need to be in the right place for some of those opportunities to happen. So we see a lot of different career paths for folks.
No, I love that. So all the young soldiers listening to this, it's okay to fail. There was a great quote. I was trying to pull it up in my head, but I can't think of the true travesty is like, if you've never tried anything challenging enough that you would fail at it. Like if you went your whole life and you never failed, that probably means you never lived up to your potential. I'm not saying it as eloquently as the author, but hopefully that, you get the point.
Yeah, there's another quote out there that same thing. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it's basically something along the line of those that have never tried have never failed.
Right.
But obviously you have to put yourself out there and be willing to fail in order to succeed a lot of times. So.
Or in order to become the commander of Rare. So now they know you got to be persistent. What's been the most rewarding thing from your service thus far?
We're in the medical profession, right? So I think it's just a lot of times it's just those individual cases, right? Where it's easy, or it's not. Sometimes it's hard to step back and say, hey, over the course of my career, I made this impact, right? But a lot of times it's those individuals, whether that was when I was still working in a medical treatment facility. There's the one person that you made a difference with from, you might have changed their life, right? You helped them, make it through a complex medical problem that was having day-to-day impacts on them. And as I progressed, it's become watching certain leaders and soldiers that you've worked with develop and excel and succeed, and then seeing as they progress in their careers, and just thinking, okay, so all the credit belongs to the individual, but at the same time you're like, what, maybe I had a small piece of that, right? Maybe I nudged them in the right direction a little bit. Maybe I gave some sage advice, or maybe I just listened when I needed to listen. And so I think right now, outside of just appreciation for what our mission is. Again, protecting and potentially saving service members' lives. I think the more day-to-day one, or the easier one for me to relate to, is just seeing other people succeed, and just hoping that I had some small part in it. And so watching people succeed and excel, and sometimes that's in the military, and sometimes that's not, right? I've always said that the military service isn't for everyone. Sometimes it's for people for a certain amount of time in their life, right? And then sometimes it's a career of 20 plus years. There's a place for those, and you could actually even argue that our structure is built on folks. We're not built on folks that are going to serve 20, 30 years.
Right.
We are built on folks that are drawn to our mission for one reason or another, and contribute sometimes 4 years, sometimes 8 years, sometimes 12 years. So.
Well, and there's a huge advantage to having those individuals who have served go out into society, and
if you look at it, we recruit, as a force, we recruit a vast majority of our folks from the families of those that have served in the past. So,
right.
Yeah, it's important that it's it's really important that their service is a good experience. I really, that's one of the things that actually bothers me, is when you see someone, especially someone that has served for an extended period of time, that leaves under a less than 100% positive circumstances, because that's a missed opportunity, whether it be a missed opportunity to bring in other soldiers, or it's all a missed opportunity for someone to tell the DoD story. Because back to that original question that you asked way back at the beginning, as far as why you got in, and I said that a little bit of it had to do with finances at the time, and things like that. But frankly, that was because I didn't come from a military family, and I didn't understand, right? We all have a concept, or a lot of the population has a concept of what the military is, and I wish my memory was good enough to rattle off how many different MOSs and AOCs there are currently in the military, but it is immense. If you can do it in the civilian world, there's probably an opportunity for you to do it in DoD, and if it's not in a uniform, it may be as a Department of Defense civilian, right? Or a Department of the Army civilian, or even a contractor, depending upon how.
Oh yeah.
There's opportunities across the entire spectrum, and whether it's because from movies or whatever whatever your cultural background is, whatever it is that you saw or experienced as a kid. A lot of us come in with the perception that the military is about the combat arms, folks. Extremely important. We wouldn't be where we are without the combat arms, without our combat arms brothers and sisters. But at the same time, that is just one really small facet of what you can do and find in DoD.
Oh yes, sir. No, it was great. I was just at Virginia Tech talking to some nutrition students, and some didn't necessarily want to come on and wear this uniform, but I'm like, hey, we've got holistic health and fitness. Yeah. There's all these GS positions if you want to do performance. So
how did you end up as a dietitian in the Army?
How did I end up? You're the first person to turn the tide on me, sir. I know. How did I end up? Much similar. I was started off wanting to be a strength coach. Took some nutrition classes, liked the nutrition classes better than my exercise science classes. Changed majors, and I had a buddy in ROTC, and the next is history. I did ROTC and came in as a dietitian. So
sometimes I say my career is a series of happy accidents, and so that was my first was actually when I was in ROTC, and so part of the ROTC process. As you're getting closer to graduation, I of course finished a degree in nutrition, and it was what we used to call a CUP program, right? That had the internship built into it, and so I'm in my ROTC department, and you have to list your top 10 choices, because just because you have a degree in nutrition doesn't mean you're going to end up as a nutritionist. In, again, there are processes where it's very defined, but there's also processes where it's more open. And so you put out your top 10 choices, and again, the DoD wants to match you to what your expertise is, right? But it's still a process. Well, the SP Corps is not one of those, is not one of the more well-known corps, especially outside of the medical channels. And so I put, again, no military background whatsoever. Of course, my father served for a couple years in the Vietnam era, but he served his short tour and then got out, and had a couple other relatives that served really short tours, but no career military, right? And so had no idea whatsoever. I put my top 10 choices down. I turned my packet in, and if it wasn't for the work ethic and the caring of a secretary, I probably would have ended up as a MSc officer. So because I didn't know what the SP Corps was, neither did the combat arms guys that were running my ROTC unit, right? And so they're like, yeah, I think you need to, and she's like, hey, do you mind if I hang on to your packet over the weekend and I do a little research for you, because I'm pretty sure that,
you can do something else.
That you want to be, that it's not MSc. I think there's another corps where nutrition or dietitians go into it. And she did whatever she did over the weekend. She came back on Monday and she's like, you know what? I think you want to put SP as your number one choice. I'm like, okay. I'm like, sure, scratch
that
it out,
little
put it down there, and so.
Which is funny because I started out med service because of that. They did not know. I didn't have that secretary.
Well, but it also speaks to the difference between a job and a career. Luckily, the department that I went to school in had an administrator that saw it as a profession. She wasn't there to punch the clock and say, I'm going to work my 8 hours a day and get my however many dollars an hour. She took pride and joy in what she did day to day, and she was willing to go that extra step to help out some poor young lost kid in Wisconsin. So.
Wow, that's awesome. So speaking, kind of dietitian, putting the dietitian hat back on, what would you tell an individual thinking about becoming a dietitian in the Army? As we recruit. Now we have this new master's program in nutrition.
So, I've done the same thing you did, where I've gone to a couple universities and talked to them. And I think what is different is the vast amount of opportunities that we have, right? Whether it be holistic health and fitness, nutrition and performance stuff, whether it be working in the critical care setting, whether it be working in the public health setting, you can literally chart your path. And by the way, it can change, right? So again, my path changed several times over the course of my career, as you learn what it is you want to do. There are some people that working in the same job for 40 years is where their joy is, right? But there are some people that want a different challenge. And the one thing that the Army will do is provide you different challenges. And while we will let you specialize in an area of nutrition, we encourage more rounding as an officer, So there are very few people that can follow one track the entire time. So obviously nutrition and performance is one of your loves and passions. But I'm willing to bet you can name off a couple assignments within your career that were not focused on nutrition and performance. But that's a good thing. It gives you different chances, different opportunities, but yet we'll still let you specialize. And so that's one of the things that I think the Army does that there are very few other jobs out there that'll do. The other thing is we challenge people earlier in their careers than you will ever get in the civilian counterparts. I was a dietitian nutritionist for 4 years, and I was running a nutrition department at a small community hospital. Not something you're likely to have happen to you with 4 years of experience in the outside world.
Right.
And then from there, it just continues. Whereas if you follow similar paths in the outside world, you might be working 20, 30 years before you get an opportunity that we're giving people. We're giving a lot of our dietitians these same opportunities at 4, 6, 8 years into their career. Now, again, we have a system set up to help make sure that they don't fail, right? But we challenge early and often. And if you're the type of person that likes to be challenged early and often, then the Army is the place for you.
Love it. Kind of wrapping up here, do you have any book recommendations or resource recommendations? It can be on leadership, on nutrition, just kind of some things that really stuck with you over the years that you think folks should take a look at.
So there's 1,000 leadership books out there, and they're reading lists. I think I have found personally that I meld, multiple different ones, and so be a voracious reader. There's the 2 most recent books that I read, just because those are the ones that come to the top of my mind. One is one that I reread. I read it about 10 years ago, but it's called Broken Windows. And that there's some interesting aspects to it. One of which is that if you're leading or running an organization, first impressions and appearances make a difference, right? It just changes the entire aspect of, if someone walks into your organization and says, this is a quality first-class organization, whatever it is that you are trying to convince them of or sell them of or advocate for, it gets a lot easier. It's a good book. It's a quick book. It's an easy read. I wouldn't say it was a life-changing one, but one of the more recent ones. And actually, another book, again, not going to get into geopolitics in this podcast. That's way too deep. That's deep for me on a daily basis, much less for this podcast. But there's a new book out there that talks about Putin, right? And one of the things that it taught me, it's not necessarily a leadership book, but it actually taught me a lot, because you saw how he changed and how he grew is not the word I'd look for, because I don't know that it's a positive scenario right now.
Yeah.
But you can see how all of his experiences morphed him into the leader that he is today. And then it also gives you good perspective on, again, how things aren't always black and white. There are a lot of different perspectives out there, and we have a tendency to see things from, a very egocentric, perspective. But a good leader, I've found, is someone that will explore issues from all aspects and then make their own opinions and their own judgments. And so those are, if I'm not reading a leadership book, if I'm reading a book about a topic, I always search out the ones and appreciate the ones that will give me all the different approaches and opinions. And I think that's something that's lacking more and more now. Even when it comes to the news that we see, and it goes way beyond just politics and stuff like that. News in general. One of the negatives, I think, to there being so many choices is it's very easy to find one that lines up perfectly with what your natural thought process are. And so what I liked, and the reason why I brought that book up, what I liked about it is the author approached it from the perspective of, this is a flawed personality. I'm not going to say good or bad. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about the entire life story, and it's going to be a lesson in, how a person changes and morphs over time. And so I love the ability to, whether it's what I'm reading or whether I'm exploring, even just news. That's one thing I implore people to do. Search out the different perspectives and opinions. You don't have to agree with them, but you will learn something from them. And it will make you a better person, and it will make you a better leader. Because again, you don't have to agree with everyone's perspective, but the better you understand it, the better you're going to be able to lead those individuals, and or make sure that you're checking and balancing your own approaches to any situation or problem.
Yeah, or even close that gap between individuals who maybe are on two different sides of the spectrum. No, sir, great advice, and I'll put that in the show notes for sure. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate you taking your time to sit down here and share your wisdom.
Yeah, no, anytime. This was fun.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming on. That's it for this episode. Again, please go on to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast information. Like, subscribe, so we can bring you more great episodes like the one today. Thanks.